I first came to an ISKCON temple on Labor Day weekend, 1967, in Montreal. I was studying in Toronto, and I'd come for the weekend to visit Expo. And I casually asked one of my friends, is there any Hindu temple in Montreal? He said, yes, the Americans have opened some temple here. Why don't you visit it? So I went to the Montreal temple on Labor Day weekend, 67. And I took part in the Sunday program. The kirtan just went on and on and on and on. And as I was leaving the temple, they had a visitor's book in which I wrote down my name and address. And after returning to Toronto, I started getting a letter every month informing me about the schedule and asking for donation. And in May 68, I received a letter. Our Swamiji is coming to Montreal on June 1st, 68. Please come and meet him. So I was planning on relocating back to Montreal in any case. And I arrived in Montreal on May 31st. And the first assignment the temple president gave me was to clean Prabhupada's apartment, because Prabhupada was coming the next day. And Prabhupada resided at 420 Prince Arthur. So I had the privilege of meeting Prabhupada on June 1st, 1968. And I had almost no exposure to sadhus in India. In fact, there was one Bengali gentleman, Mr. Mukherjee. We used to come to meet Prabhupada regularly. He told me, oh, this sadhu is different. Anyway, as time went along, I could see that Prabhupada was a genuine saint. He quoted from the scriptures. He never said something of his own. He was like a real well-wisher, very friendly. And he wanted everyone to be happy. But he knew that real happiness will only come if we follow the scriptures. And Prabhupada was always straightforward. And in those days, there were not so many devotees. Prabhupada actually stayed in Montreal for 3 months. He had some green card problems in America. So he had to go out of America. And he came to Montreal on June 1st. And he stayed on till August 68. And in those days, leaders from different parts of America would regularly come to meet Prabhupada.
After moving in the temple in Ottawa, we were a few new devotees, brahmacharis, and then 6 months down the line, that was like in July, 7 months in July of 74, we came to know that Srila Prabhupada was to be in New Vrindavan. So we came to know a little bit at the last minute. We drove all the way to New Vrindavan, and that was the very first time I physically saw Srila Prabhupada, and we were 3 brahmacharis at the time who received initiation from Srila Prabhupada. That was the first time also I saw a large number of sannyasis and you know, with dandas. So that was a whole experience, of course, seeing so many senior, because in the small temple in Ottawa, we practically had no, Prabhupada never came there, and it was Satswarup Maharaj who was traveling from temple to temple, the library party. That was the only sannyasi we had met. So I met, or saw Srila Prabhupada, got initiated outside actually. They had arranged Vyasa-san. Prabhupada gave a lecture 21st of July 1974. Yeah.
I first met Srila Prabhupada in Atlanta, Georgia. That was in February 1975, and it was during the time of Prabhupada's honoring Bhaktisiddhanta's appearance day. And I saw him first. It was in the evening. There was a large gathering of devotees in the temple room in Atlanta. And it was a very special energy there. Of course, I was astounded by Prabhupada's size. He wasn't very tall, because in the pictures that you see of him, everything's humongous in a way. His eyes, the stretch of his mouth, and his earlobes come down quite big. And when you heard a recording of his voice, it was quite strong and baritonish, I guess. And so you had this image of a very big man. So now you see him, and well, he's just a small person, with a big message. And it was unique because Prabhupada taught us the bhajan by Lochana Das Thakur, Paramakaruna. It's a beautiful song highlighting the two lords, Chaitanya and Nityananda, and what they had come here for. And what did they come here for? To establish a party, an eternal party, having a good time, and at the same time being spiritual about it. So that was very significant. Srila Prabhupada also played the mridanga for us, which was very rare in those days. He gave a lot of mercy. The second, some other instances during that time, Srila Prabhupada watched a drama by our devotees. There was this episode of Chaitanya meeting the Muslim leader Chandkazi. And you couldn't help but kind of like look back and see, I'm a spectator, and I'm sort of looking back at Prabhupada, who's also a spectator, and I'm seeing that he's enjoying this very much. He really loves he enjoyed the fact that Krishna consciousness can be projected, through entertainment. So that was significant for me. There was a kirtan also that was held, and I recall many devotees were chanting near the deities. Prabhupada sat on his Vyasa-san in the temple room, and there was one fellow who was a little bit frivolous. He had the drum, he was playing the mridanga, and he sort of projected it forward and let it come back and bounce off his belly. And in this way, it was going back and forth. He was rather close to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada sort of looked his way towards the mridanga player and gave sort of a sour look, and as if to say, "What are you doing?" And it's not. I think Prabhupada appreciated frivolity to some extent, but if it goes a little overboard, then it wasn't so acceptable for him.
As I said, I had zero exposure to sadhus. I had never been to Vrindavan in my life. I had never even heard of Vrindavan or Mayapur before I met Prabhupada. And I had never heard of Lord Chaitanya. The brief introduction of what Prabhupada was given to me by the Bengali gentleman who said, "I've touched the feet of many sadhus, but he looks special." And as I said earlier, Prabhupada also gave me a lot of attention. I was Prabhupada's first Indian disciple in the West. And Prabhupada had a strong desire to also preach to the Indians. And he wanted them to take to Krishna consciousness. Actually, there was one Indian who had joined from Buffalo, but he didn't stay for long.
The first time I met Srila Prabhupada was in a poster in my friend's apartment. His name was Gary Preston. He had a degree in, he had studied theology at the University of Toronto, and I was searching for a guru, and I asked him, of all the gurus on the scene these days, who do you think's like the most authentic, the most like non-frills, least commercialized? And he pointed to a photo, a black and white photo, and a grave-looking image of Prabhupada. He had this very serious look on his face, and my friend Gary said, of all the gurus on the scene these days, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, he's the real deal. He's authentic. He's representing the tradition of the Vedic culture.
Well, my first contact with Prabhupada actually was through the Bhagavad-Gita. I had been praying that if God exists, He has to manifest Himself to me because I'm fed up with life and I can't go on like this. I didn't want to die or anything like that, but I was sure there was something else, you know. And so I really prayed to whatever was there at the time. Well, actually, I was practicing Ashtanga Yoga, so I knew about Brahman. I had some realization of Brahman, and I found it really not interesting because it's very impersonal. I mean, I kind of merged in the light, and it was dull. So that's when I actually prayed, if there's something else to the absolute truth, then, you know, show it to me. And the next day, some devotees knocked on my door. It was Vishwambar and who was in charge of GBC of Canada at that time. He was in charge of the Gurukul afterwards. I don't remember his name. And they left me a Bhagavad-Gita. We had kirtan for about 2 hours because I had plenty of musical instruments. I was also a musician at that time. And my wife and I read through the Gita introduction the very same night. And it was clear to me that all the answers I was looking for were there. So we decided to go to the temple. And as soon as we got to the temple, which was an old bowling alley on the 3rd floor of a building, the first thing I saw was the Prabhupada picture holding his cane made in Russia next to Imavati. And I immediately recognized him as my spiritual master. So, you know, it's like we met before. And here we are again. And the music and the colors and the scents, the incense and the flowers and everything else, I just felt at home.
In June '68, we had gone to a high school engagement in a Christian school. It was a school for girls, and there were many nuns in the school. And this program was arranged by a French-Canadian devotee called Janardhan Prabhu. He was doing his PhD at that time. So Prabhupada gave the lecture, and as usual after Prabhupada's lecture, he would say, any questions? The same Mr. Mukherjee, who had told me that Prabhupada was a different type of saint, got up from his chair and started attacking Prabhupada. He started saying, why do you have to come and preach this philosophy in these Christian countries? They have their own philosophy. You don't need to do this. Devotees were very upset in the way he was being attacked. Prabhupada was not being criticized by the Christian nuns. He was being criticized by one of the people who came in his entourage. So devotees were very upset, and Prabhupada was very cool. In August, Prabhupada was leaving Montreal to go to America. And he told me, Gopal, go and call that Mr. Mukherjee. I said, Prabhupada, he insulted you so badly. Why do you want to see him? And Prabhupada said, I must have done something to him in my last life for which he took revenge. So Prabhupada, I called this gentleman, and Prabhupada blessed him before leaving. So from this we can see how magnanimous and merciful Prabhupada was. And even though this man had humiliated Prabhupada, he really attacked Prabhupada very badly. Prabhupada tolerated it, did not utter one word, and in fact he blessed him before leaving. So I think from this example we should draw inspiration and not retaliate the moment somebody criticizes us. We have to learn to practice Sinadapi Sunicena.
Actually, my first meeting with Srila Prabhupada was not physical, but on the spiritual plane. Somehow, when I met the devotees in Vancouver in the summer of 1971, I'd been really urgently searching for a true spiritual guide. And when I met the devotees, I remember, I think the second week after I moved in the temple, there was a nice photo that they were sharing that had just arrived from Los Angeles, and showing Srila Prabhupada with a dozen disciples who were all kneeling as Prabhupada was arriving. And the gaze on Prabhupada's face was so saturated love and concern, and such a beautiful, loving glance he had. And all the devotees, you could see, they were so inspired and they were so nourished by Prabhupada's loving glance. And I was so moved to the core of my being, and I said, oh my God, how great that this pure saint is, because that he can draw out so much love from his followers. So somehow I was blessed with a tiny drop of Prabhupada's Krishnananda. It was very powerful, and it's been one of the great sustaining forces in my life, for sure. Prabhupada is not of this world. He came to bring us out of this world, and he came with the full package, the highest knowledge, the deepest, purest love, and Ananda. Prabhupada was always in Ananda, but it was his preaching, it was his compassion that dominated his life. He spent every ounce of his life to give Krishna to the whole world, and we were dragged or pulled into that divine force, and it was so amazing. We've had such extraordinary lives because Prabhupada brought us into his service to his guru, the greatest ongoing miracle. It's like amazing.
When I first came in contact with the Hare Krishna devotees, and they gave me some literature and was reading, and I thought that because I'm coming from an Indian background, I had a respect for all the other sadhus in India. So I thought that maybe I was in Ottawa, and I went to the Indian High Commission library to read about their philosophies, like Ramana Maharshi or Aurobindo or Vivekananda, and there's so many others. And I thought that maybe I should see what they have to say about the spiritual life. And I was taken aback by reading Prabhupada's books, which was so simple and makes all sense. So immediately I had this attraction.
So Samir called me, so I had come, and I was getting into the temple trying to see where the devotees are. They were not in the main temple, and I was surprised that no one seems to be there. It was really empty. Then I came down near the kitchen, and they told me that Prabhupada is up in the Prasadam hall. So I said, this adjoining building to the main building. So I went up, and then I saw, as I entered the Prasadam hall, Prabhupada was right standing in front of me. I was really surprised to see him there by offering obeisances. So Prabhupada inquired my name, where I am from. Then he asked me the question, are you chanting Hare Krishna? I took it as I'm chanting regularly 16 rounds like other devotees. So I told him, I'm trying to chant, Prabhupada. He said, oh, you're trying. What is the difficulty? Just do it. I guess Prabhupada came up with this phrase, just do it, before Nike took it as their catchphrase. So then we all came down, and Prabhupada had kind of a gathering with devotees. So at that time also, after talking with the devotees, Prabhupada asked, anybody has any question? So my situation, I was going through some difficult situation at that time personally. So I told Srila Prabhupada, I am not really succeeding in material life, neither I am, latched on to, the spiritual process. What should I do? And Prabhupada repeated the same thing, chant Hare Krishna. So I think this is my main instruction. Prabhupada told me twice the same day, chant Hare Krishna. So I guess that is actually eventually I found out that is actually the process for this age.
When Prabhupada was in Montreal, he opened a bank account in the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, and the branch, I believe, was on Sherbrooke Street. And Prabhupada told me to handle that account for him. So I was giving Prabhupada regular reports, and Prabhupada saw that the bank was charging a high fee for some reason. And Prabhupada was so concerned about saving every penny of Krishna's money. He said, tell the bank not to charge this fee. And Prabhupada, I think, they had to close the bank account because the bank was charging a high fee. As we know from numerous examples, Prabhupada's concern was not to waste even a penny of Krishna's money. He viewed everything as Krishna's property. And whenever he saw some misuse, he would take steps to stop it.
When I first saw Srila Prabhupada was in New Vrindavan in 1974. We had come down from the Ottawa temple to New Vrindavan, and I was going to get initiated. It was the July of 1974. Big initiation in New Vrindavan, 35 devotees. And so the first morning we had walked from the old farm down to Bahulaban, and Prabhupada was out on a morning walk, and we were standing on the road, and I saw the devotees. They were coming down from the upper area of New Vrindavan down towards Bahulaban, and then there's a little rise in the road, and so we couldn't, but we started to see the tops of the dundas, and then, a few heads of the devotees, and I was wondering, where's Prabhupada? Where's Prabhupada? And all of a sudden this small, I always thought, I had seen pictures of Prabhupada on the walls in Ottawa and everything, and I always thought Prabhupada was going to be huge, and the way he spoke with such grandeur and emphasis on Krishna, and just the way he spoke made him seem magnificent. And to see his physical stature so small surprised me. But then we all went in and Prabhupada gave class, and there was the same old Prabhupada with the same grandeur and magnificence. And it was just amazing to see him. And I was fortunate enough to get initiated that day, and many devotees, or maybe not that day, but a day later. And many devotees in the beginning didn't understand Prabhupada speaking, and I had only been a devotee for about 3.5 months, so I was pretty well down with what Srila Prabhupada was saying, but when he actually handed me my beads, I couldn't understand what he had said. And I was like, uh-oh, I don't know my name. And I took my beads and I walked away, and I was like, I don't even know who I am. And it wasn't until I went to see Jagadish later, and Jagadish had been speaking with Prabhupada the night before, and he had written down the name that I was to get. And he said, your name is Krishnadas Kaviraj Das. And I said, it clicked now, it suddenly clicked what Prabhupada had said, and he said, your name is Krishnadas Das. And so I said, Prabhupada said Krishnadas Das, so is my name Krishnadas Das, or is it Krishnadas Kaviraj Das? And he said, well, Prabhupada said your name was going to be Krishnadas Kaviraj Das. That's what we've got written down in the book, so let's go with that. So I've been Krishnadas Kaviraj Das ever since.
Well, the first time I met Prabhupada is we used to make person-to-person call. So Prabhupada was in New Vrindavan, so we called there and we were asking for Bhaktivedanta, and they said he's here, but he's on a Glubjaman break. So we knew, so we drove down to New Vrindavan. And I was a 1-month bhakta at that time. 17 years old, just turning 18. So Prabhupada was going to give a class outside. There were so many devotees. So they had set up the Vyasasan of Prabhupada in the staircase of Kuladri's cabin. He had the staircase and his cabin was up. So that's where Prabhupada's Vyasasan was. And I wanted to see Prabhupada and hear Prabhupada. So I was standing in an area to be close. And devotees were a little annoyed because they wanted me to move. And, but I thought they just want my spot. Coming from the karma world, the competitive mood. So anyway, I just walked around them and stayed there. And when Prabhupada came, we all offered obeisances. And at a point, maybe because I had long hair, was a hippie and so forth, Prabhupada looked at me. And like many devotees describe, that Prabhupada saw through you. And I was really inspired because, Prabhupada wasn't judgmental. He wasn't like condemning you. He could see where you were coming from, but not the body, but, your treachery in the material world, But I could understand that this person knows me. He's the one who can cure me. Like a doctor, he has to know the disease before he can cure you. So I really felt secure with Prabhupada. And although prior to that, I'd met people with Guru Maharaji and they were saying, oh, he can give you delight and so forth and so on. And I expressed that to a devotee. And he said, well, what's your qualification, for him to reveal anything? So I was very impressed with the devotees. And then meeting Prabhupada, it was even more impressive to see Srila Prabhupada. So that was the first time I saw Prabhupada.
I remember my second time I saw Prabhupada in late July 1972 in New Vrindavan. There was this amazing gathering of devotees for the Bhagavad-Dharma discourses, and Prabhupada drew devotees from all across the country. Even some came from Europe to take part in this historic event. And so when Prabhupada was going to deliver the first major lecture, at the top of the hill, they had built a special pavilion, open air, just the roof, and it was a nice hill to go up. So we had to carry Prabhupada on the palanquin up the hill. And so somehow Keshava and Prabhupada's entourage, Prabhupada was just arriving in his car, and Keshava chose a few tall devotees, and I was chosen, okay, you're going to help carry Prabhupada's palanquin. So we brought the palanquin closer to Prabhupada's car. He came and he got on the palanquin, and when we lifted it, it didn't have any additional weight. Like Prabhupada's, by his mystic power, he was weightless, and it was like quite nice. So that was a beautiful thing to experience. And then we brought the palanquin up the hill, and there was 400 devotees behind us having a rip-roaring kirtan. And Prabhupada looked so regal and so majestic, but yet he had such a humble demeanor. It was very, very amazing. That's one of Prabhupada's qualities beyond this world, He was both humble and majestic in the same person all at once, because he was pure devotee and no ego, but he was channeling all this potency. And yet he always had this beautiful, humble, nice, natural, spontaneous, loving nature. I also once gave a garland to Prabhupada 6 months later in LaGuardia Airport with Rupanuga given me the chance to offer that garland to Prabhupada. And when I walked up to him, Prabhupada and our eyes met, and Prabhupada sort of bowed in such a beautiful, humble manner to say, oh, you're offering this nice thing to me? You could see it in his eyes. He was so, touched by a very small offering, And I was a bit nervous, but I could see Prabhupada's loving, humble nature, and it was such an inspiration to have that, in his presence. Everything was so magical.
I got a Gita that evening from Nandikeshwar Prabhu, and then he said, listen, we're going to be meeting Srila Prabhupada, our guru, in Chicago in a couple of weeks. Would you like to come and meet him? So I went and asked the other band members, do you mind if I go? We don't have any work right now. And they said, yeah, go take a break. And so I jumped in the Volkswagen van and I headed to Chicago, 500 miles south to Chicago. And when I arrived, I saw the back of Vishnu Jan Swami's bus, and I was very intrigued, seeing the ektar and the tambura, and I was very alert. And I went and lived in the temple with, it seemed like hundreds of Radha Damodar brahmacharis, very intense mood compared to the dozen devotees back in Winnipeg. And they were painting the whole temple white. It's in one of your memories where Prabhupada said, wherever I go, I always smell fresh paint. So then they were sprucing up the temple, which used to be the YMCA in Evanston. And then as the days kept coming closer, they were announcing, Prabhupada is coming, Prabhupada is coming. And finally the day actually arrived. And it was like, banzai, let's get out to Old Hare Krishna Airport and meet Prabhupada. So I jumped in a van and we all crowded in there. And there was a big kirtan, of course, to greet Prabhupada, either at United Airlines, I believe he was supposed to be entering, and then they made an announcement, such and such flight will be at the American airline. So then the whole big kirtan party moved to the other side of the terminal, and there was so much apprehension. It was building and building and building. The kirtan was building and building. And then finally the doors opened and Prabhupada came. And there was an immediate tsunami of transcendental emotion that just washed over me. I saw devotees, yell, Prabhupada, and tears were shooting out of some devotees' eyes, and they were smiling at the same time. I'd never seen such a contradiction of emotions, of crying and joy. And everyone hit the deck, so I just did the same thing as the rest. And the Swamis were there blocking everyone because they were going for Prabhupada's feet just to make a way for him. And this had a tremendous samskara impact upon me. And I was really impressed that he carried himself with this dignity. He was like an aristocrat, but at the same time you couldn't sense he had any false ego. That you could see that he wasn't thinking, oh, I'm glad you realize I'm Srila Prabhupada. It was more like, oh, Siddhanta Prabhu is here, and this one is here, and that, and all my sons and daughters are here to greet me. It was pure. It was love, and it was about us for Prabhupada.
As Prabhupada was in Montreal, many leaders would come there, and Montreal had become a focal point. In fact, Prabhupada saw some buildings in Montreal and said, this could be our world headquarters. He was at one time planning on making the world headquarters in Montreal. And Prabhupada saw everything as a possible. Prabhupada always was thinking how he can use everything in service of the Lord.
I had the good pleasure also of being on the morning walk with Srila Prabhupada in Atlanta, and it was quite a frigid day, even for myself being a Nordic person from Canada. Prabhupada was very resilient, it appeared, and he had he was very well dressed. And he moved along, and the group of Vaishnavas that were with him were really attentive, and I guess I was one of those persons trying to be very attentive, so I kept my ear in the direction to where his voice was coming from. I couldn't decipher very well what he was saying, but I was so fixated on trying to be there and catch every word. I really wasn't watching where I was going. And so suddenly I hit this lamppost, like a metal lamppost, and it made this incredible loud twang noise, and it vibrated like anything. And my companion, who was my Sankirtan leader, Giri Jadava Prabhu, he heard the sound. He looked back at me, he goes, shh, like this. And I was just thinking, well, what about me? I'm in pain. A bump showed up on the forehead here like that. And I guess the lesson that I got out of that is that everyone was really attentive to Prabhupada, and nothing else really mattered.
There was one lady who came to meet Prabhupada, and Prabhupada, as usual, preached to her, please chant Hare Krishna mantra. The lady said, Swamiji, I'm always chanting, 24 hours. Prabhupada said, 24 hours? How do you chant? She said, I'm mentally chanting 24 hours. So Prabhupada said, when you're hungry, do you mentally eat or do you physically eat? She said, physically. Prabhupada said, no, you should start eating mentally. So she realized, and Prabhupada told her, if you want to chant the holy name, you should chant it and hear, not just mentally go on chanting. That is as good as no chanting. So this lady was convinced that what Prabhupada said was right. So Prabhupada emphasized that we should chant the holy name and hear the holy name. And as the scriptures say, the more attentive we are in chanting, the greater will be the effect, and the faster will be the cleansing of the heart.
The next time I saw Srila Prabhupada was after I served in the temple some months, and my temple president, Uddhama Shloka Prabhu, said, how would you like to get initiated by Srila Prabhupada? And I said, I'm not qualified to be initiated by Srila Prabhupada. And he said, that's the qualification. If you would have thought you were qualified, I wouldn't have recommended you. So I thought, okay, here goes. And so Prabhupada came to Detroit, and it was the unofficial grand opening of Devasadan Mandir that Ambarish Prabhu and Lekha Shravanti had acquired. And so I remember I was very nervous standing in the lineup to get my beads, and I was going over the regs, hoping I wasn't going to freeze up in front of Srila Prabhupada. And finally my turn came, Bhakta Glen, and I came forward, and Srila Prabhupada asked, so what are the 4 principles, and are you chanting 16 rounds? Which I said I was, and I repeated the 4 regulative principles. And while I was standing there, I felt like I'd never had this experience with anybody before. As Prabhupada was looking at me, I felt he had like an X-ray vision, that he was looking at many, many lifetimes of me and all my sinful activities. And I felt totally embarrassed standing in front of him that, you know, what am I'm not qualified to be accepted by Prabhupada. And I was overwhelmed with emotion that he was accepting me at that moment. And if I could say, I got some realization that he was Trikalagya. He could see past, present, and future. And I'd never experienced that with anybody in my life.
The first personal encounter I had with Prabhupada was in Paris in '73, just before the installation of Radha Parasishvara. And we had just acquired that temple, and there was a lot of going on to prepare for Prabhupada's arrival. And Prabhupada arrived, and I was next to the deities after they were installed. And Prabhupada told me, Radharani's dress is too straight. You should put some stick under her skirt or something to make it wider. And so, you know, I took note of that. And then he turned and he said, it's not right that Balaram is so close, because they were the Jagannath deities next to the Radha Krishna deities. So he said, it's not right that Balaram is so close to Radharani. There should be some kind of separation. So by tomorrow, you should make some kind of arrangement so that Radharani is not so close to Balaram. So I was not even initiated at that time. I got initiated a few days later. But I was charged to find some way to separate Balaram and Radharani. So I went to buy some trellises, how do you call them? Wood with carvings in them and everything else to suspend from the ceiling and paint them in gold and everything to put them between the 2 altars. And well, that was the very first personal encounter I had with Prabhupada.
Prabhupada came to India with his Western disciples, I believe in 1971 or something. Anyway, they created a big stir. Prabhupada held festivals in major cities of India. And these festivals were attended by over 30,000 people. So taking advantage of the popularity of the Hare Krishna movement, one leading movie star in India made a movie called Hare Rama, Hare Krishna. The movie was a big hit in India. It was a super hit. The positive thing in the movie was The Hare Krishna mantra was being played in the background in the whole movie, and they had a song which had the Hare Krishna mantra. But the weak point in the movie was it showed that devotees take drugs, then they feel high, and then they chant Hare Krishna. So this movie was released in India in 1973. So at that time I was residing in America, but I had just come to India for a holiday. So I met Prabhupada in Akash Ganga, and I told him, Srila Prabhupada, this movie is going to give our movement a bad name. Our movement was brand new in India at that time. And I said, this movie is showing that we chant Hare Krishna and people take drugs, so that will spoil our image. Prabhupada was totally undisturbed. He said, nothing will be lost. People will hear the Hare Krishna mantra and get purified. Don't worry. And very interestingly, about 3 years ago, I initiated a devotee in America, and I asked him, how did he join the movement? So he told me when he was a young kid, there was a movie released called Hare Rama, Hare Krishna. And he heard the Hare Krishna mantra in that movie. And after that, he fell in love with this mantra. And he would go everywhere where he could hear this song that was a big hit. But that movie planted the seed of Krishna consciousness in his heart. And 25 years later, or 35 years later, he got initiated. So what Prabhupada said was right. People will hear the holy name and benefit. Prabhupada is always right. We should know that.
I was with Prabhupada on a morning walk in Toronto, and I was very fortunate enough to go with Prabhupada. And then the many devotees were asking questions. And one Indian devotee, he asked Prabhupada, actually he was complaining to Prabhupada about other devotees, other North American devotees, is that, they always criticize him. And he thought that he was expecting that Prabhupada being from India, he would support him. Instead, what Prabhupada did, he was telling him, do your service very diligently and try to please Krishna. And then in that way, you will definitely, everybody will get your attention that you are doing such a nice service. So in that way, you just ignore what others are saying and just do your devotional service properly, and just do not pay any attention to what others are saying. So I thought that was a very, very nice answer, and it applies to all of us. So I really think that Prabhupada was amazing.
Before I came, there was almost no book production in India. So Prabhupada told me to start the book production. And Prabhupada was very keen that we publish a lot of books. At that time we were just beginning to publish books. So in 1976, I believe 77, I had arranged a very big book display of Prabhupada books in a very big book house called International Book House. This was a very big book house, and they were distributing Time and Reader's Digest. And the owner was a life member, and I was cultivating him. So I arranged a very big display in his store. We had Prabhupada books on display, we had all the promotion material, and we ran this promotion for 1 month. But after 1 month, not many books were sold. So I went to Prabhupada to give him a report that even though we had a very heavy promotion, prominent display in the windows, etc., we didn't sell a lot of books. And Prabhupada said, my books are sold because of the enthusiasm of my disciples. And in a store, nobody's enthusiastic. That's why. So we have seen that when devotees are enthusiastic, they achieve outstanding results. Doesn't matter what the service is, especially book distribution. And if we're not enthusiastic, if we do something half-heartedly, then the results are not the same. So Prabhupada repeated that twice or thrice. My books are sold because of the enthusiasm of my devotees. So I usually try and tell this story to some good devotees. And they all testify that when they're enthusiastic, they achieve very good results.
Well, in 1975, there was a Rath Yatra in Philadelphia. Prabhupada came, and one morning, there was the morning of the Rath Yatra, Prabhupada was giving class, and of course, the place was packed. There was devotees out in the windows, hanging out, trying to listen. So Prabhupada was giving his lecture, and there was a lot of noise in the hallway. So someone decided to close the doors of the temple room, and immediately Prabhupada noticed it. And he said, why the doors closed? Oh, Prabhupada, there's noise, this and that. Prabhupada said, no, open the doors. They need to listen. They need to hear. And it was impressive to me to see how Prabhupada was not wrapped up in himself. Although he was preaching and he was giving his class, he was aware of these things. And immediately he picked up on it. And his compassion, that he didn't mind the disturbance if people could hear. And so it was, to see that sensitivity that Prabhupada had was extraordinary. It reveals so much without words, but you could see the depth of the person, the state of consciousness, that he could be so sensitive and aware of these little things taking place, even though he was delivering, the absolute truth, the Srimad Bhagavatam. Being that aware, it was very impressive to see Prabhupada like that.
Perhaps the best story I can share. Of course, I was always thankful to Prabhupada for giving me so many wonderful associates. I was on the library party, and I had some wonderful friends there. Ganesham became Bhakti Tirtha, Chiru, Mahabodhi, Sahotra. I developed very deep friendships with these wonderful devotees. And so I'd been traveling with the library party, and we all congregated in Chicago. End of July 1975, Radha Damodar party was there, and there was a big initiation that week. And there was a darshan where Sadhguru, our team leader, brought us all to meet Prabhupada. And then he, as soon as we were in Prabhupada's presence, within a couple of minutes, Prabhupada turned to Sadhguru and he said, so you brought your men? And so that was the cue for Sadhguru to name his team. So he started with Ganesham, Mahabodhi, Sahotra, etc. And I was forgotten. That was no big thing. But then 2 minutes later, in a pause, Sadhguru said, oh, there's another new man from Canada. His name is Gokulananda. And Prabhupada said, what is that? And Sadhguru repeated, oh, Gokulananda's there. Prabhupada said, oh, such a nice name, Gokulananda. And it was so intense and beautiful, Prabhupada's ecstasy. His face was filled with ecstasy and this effulgent smile. And the ecstasy from Prabhupada entered into everyone's heart. The whole room became filled with ecstasy. There was about 20 of us devotees there, and everyone felt the magic of Prabhupada's ecstasy. We were engulfed in his ecstasy. It was really beautiful and memorable. And every time I meet some of my friends like Sesha and others, they often remind me, and they say, Gokula Ananda. That was Prabhupada's way of sharing the ecstasy, sharing the love. That was magical. And of course, I think of that practically every day. It's the best memory. Because that's such a beautiful name of Krishna. It's very suitable to my own meditation because I always was fixated and interested on Ananda. Who has Ananda? Who has the best Ananda? Prabhupada has the best Ananda because he loves Krishna, who is the source of all Ananda. So that was very, very beautiful, extraordinary.
And on another morning walk, which was along Lake Michigan at a park, with Prabhupada and a host of other devotees, God brothers, some who were taken sannyas, they had their dandas and everything. So I was walking along, straggling along a little behind, not important enough to be too close. And there was this cyclist who came along, and he stopped right in front of me. He was like maybe 3 yards away from me. And it was an abrupt stop. And he asked for some attention. He said, "Excuse me." And it wasn't to me, it wasn't directed to me. It was more directed to the devotees who were huddled around Prabhupada. And so he asked a simple question: why is it that some of you are carrying sticks and others are not? That was the simple question. And devotees just kind of went for a silent moment or two, and they waited for Prabhupada to give a reply. Prabhupada had stopped at that point, and everyone else did. You know, he'd move, he'd stop. Everyone would stop, and then he'd move, and everyone moved. It was like that. So Prabhupada didn't really understand the question so well. He just went to Brahmananda, sort of turned his head over to Brahmananda and said, "What did he say?" And then Brahmananda's interpretation of that question was, "He wants to know why we carry the sticks, Prabhupada." And then Prabhupada thought about it for a second. He said, "Tell him they are there to shoo away the dogs." So that was the response that got back to him. The fellow heard it. So I was very close to him, the cyclist that is. And at that, his remark was, as a follow-up, "Well, ask a stupid question, you get a stupid answer." And I just remember saying to him, "Oh, it wasn't a stupid question. You just talked to somebody who's very special right now." That was it.
When I got my first initiation, I got to Prabhupada and he asked me for the 4 regulative principles and everything. And I think it's Pradyumna who had the list of the names for the new devotees. And he gave some name to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada looked at me and he said, "No." I went, he doesn't want to initiate me. I froze there for, a length of time, which for me, it was an eternity. And then he looked at me right in the eyes and he said, "Vishnu Rata, Prabhu." And then everybody went, "Haribol." He said, "One was always protected by Vishnu." I later learned that it was the name of Parikshit Maharaj. And so that was quite an experience.
There's one statement I will always remember, which kind of indicated Srila Prabhupada's, high level of Krishna consciousness. That was in Montreal. We were in the same room, or the same apartment actually, where Prabhupada was staying. It was the apartment of the temple president at the time. And we were not in the room where Prabhupada was having some discussion. At that time, the 5th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam had just been, was not yet printed. I believe Srila Prabhupada was writing various purports. So the conversation was relating, because the 5th canto deals with the cosmology, which is a very deep subject matter and a little bit controversial, like the moon further away than the sun and things like that. So in that conversation, Srila Prabhupada, at one point, and we were about, 15 devotees in the other room just trying to catch whatever Prabhupada was going on, the conversation. So at one point, Srila Prabhupada made the following statement, which to me kind of was very significant. He said that this particular comment that I have made, I think he was referring to something in the purport, is dealing with realization, has to do with realization. Means that, in Krishna consciousness, certain things we can understand not simply or not only by reading, but also Krishna reveals, you know. So that's the way I took it and understood it, that certain explanations that he was giving were from his level of realization as revealed, that's how I took it, as revealed by Krishna himself. So that's one statement that will always be with me, I suppose, to indicate Srila Prabhupada's high level of spiritual realization, which is only possible for someone who is a pure devotee like Srila Prabhupada. Yeah.
So in 1977, I went to Sridham Mayapur to receive my Gayatri initiation from Srila Prabhupada. And while I was there, Bhavananda Prabhu asked me if I'd like to do some service. So I was going around signing up sannyasis for more Bhagavatam or Gita class. And in the course of my scurrying around, somehow or other, I contracted amoebic dysentery and I became extremely ill. And because I'd been assisting Bhavananda and he wasn't seeing me anymore, word got back to him and he told Srila Prabhupada that one of your disciples is extremely ill. So Srila Prabhupada said to give him green bananas, because they're astringent, blocking, and poha, flat rice, and dahi, yogurt. That didn't really do much. So then one night when I was under my mosquito net, thinking that it wouldn't be very long before I'd be leaving my body because I was under 100 pounds. And Raghava Pandit, godbrother, who's now Bhakti Raghava Swami, showed up with two big leaf plates and he said, Bhavananda told Srila Prabhupada how you're not really getting better. And Prabhupada said, make him hot, salty puris. And so he lifted up the leaf plates and out came this puff of steam. And I just remember immediately feeling, wow, in spite of 1,000 devotees being here, Srila Prabhupada is thinking of me, little insignificant me. How amazing that is. So the quality that really stands out for me about Srila Prabhupada is his compassion, his personalism, his personal care, even though there were so many devotees and so many meetings and things going on, he was thinking about me. And so that really marked me, and to remind me that every disciple of Srila Prabhupada and every grand disciple is precious. As Prabhupada himself said, thousands of, hundreds of gallons of blood is spent to make even one devotee. So how precious every devotee is, and how I should be conscious to try to do my best, to be caring of them and to be thinking of them and be in a spirit of service of what I can do in the spirit of Srila Prabhupada.
So I went there in 76. We took Prabhupada's books. We showed them to scholars in Moscow and Leningrad. At that time, St. Petersburg was called Leningrad. And they appreciated the books. And then we went there again in 77. When I went there in 77, the late Prithu Putra Maharaj was there, also in Bhugarba. So we took part in the book fair. It was a very big book fair. And in the end, we got a certificate from the Soviet government appreciating Prabhupada's books for bringing world peace. So I received the certificate in Bombay around September 77. I took it to Prabhupada, who was in Vrindavan. His health wasn't so good. Prabhupada was so happy with that certificate that Soviet government has recognized Prabhupada's books as contributing to world peace. That Prabhupada showed that certificate to everyone who came. His godbrothers would come, he would say, this is the recognition we got from Soviet Union. Unfortunately, we've lost that certificate somewhere. I feel really sorry. But Prabhupada very much appreciated that the Soviet government was appreciating our books.
So I was on a walk once again in Chicago, and there were, I'd say, fewer people on that morning walk. Beautiful sunny day by Lake Michigan. And we walked along a trail and then came to the end of the park. There was some foliage, you know, some trees, and I think even like a stone wall. So obviously we couldn't go any further, and we had to turn back and around. So it was decided that Vishaka, the photographer, would take a picture. That it just looked really nice. Prabhupada had like a gray chadar, and Brahmananda was there, and there were a few more people. And so it was decided this would be like an iconic kind of, you know, beautifully framed photo of His Divine Grace. So Brahmananda came and just kind of helped out a little bit in his own way. He was trying to help a little bit with the folds of the chadar to see it would fall nice. And then a second devotee came along and suggested Prabhupada should switch a little bit, you know, get the right angle. Vishaka, being the photographer, also came a little bit and offered some suggestions. And then, you know, person number 2 came back in. There was a little bit of a muss and fuss, you know. And Prabhupada was, he didn't accept the confusion, but he did say that, oh, I'm just going to stay here like this now, you know. And he said, you cannot satisfy all of the people all of the time. And he had this big smile, and that was it. It's like one of those classic phrases, you can't satisfy all of the people all of the time, which is definitely the case for if you're a leader or you're parenting, or, you know, it's just the way of the world. Everyone's got their own individual take on things, and so just be satisfied pretty much what's there. So it came across as a moment of a very profound statement, and very applicable to most circumstances. So there's usually Prabhupada is projected as being a very stern-looking kind of master, and very rigid. You know, some of even his chosen photos, visages of himself, would project that. But my little experience with Prabhupada is that he was quite human, and he loved to throw a little joke out there, slip out a little remark of wit that would lighten the atmosphere, you know. So I thought that was very significant. Just because you have a master, it doesn't mean that there has to be all this incredible rigidity. It's a little bit more about, you know, being human and being light and carrying on in life in a way that makes it not so cumbersome or burdensome. I think that's really important. And Prabhupada was able to provide that with his remarks, what he had to say and do.
Being close to Prabhupada on my second initiation too. And then the other occasions I had to be with Prabhupada, well, was finding him, going to lectures, morning walks in Paris. I didn't ask any question. I was kind of shy to ask questions during the morning walks. I have pictures of Prabhupada looking at me and talking to me during the morning walks, and I don't remember what he said. But in Vrindavan, I was with him for several days, and we had many morning walks on which Prabhupada was, you know, telling about the plants. This can cure this can cure that, and he was talking about the lands that were not used properly by some of his god brothers, and some business that was going on in Vrindavan and everything else.
And one morning, when we were greeting the deities, Prabhupada was offering obeisances to Gaur Nitai, and then going to Krishna Balaram, and then to Radha Shama Sundar. So when Prabhupada was offering obeisances, someone touched Prabhupada's foot. When Prabhupada got up, he told him, don't touch my feet. And then he continued on to the other altars, and then took Charanamrita. And then he sat on the Vyasasan, and there we were offering him garlands, chanting, we were touching his feet, offering him flowers, offering obeisances. And it was a little amusing to me, to see that, the contrast. But I reflected on it, and I realized, well, when he's in front of the deities and offering his obeisances, he's a devotee. I mean, he's a spiritual master, but he's also a devotee, and then he's in that mood, so he doesn't want his feet being touched. But later on, he's the ambassador of Krishna. So so Prabhupada always knew where he was. He was never confused in any situation, and it was so reassuring in one sense to have a person that it was always black and white. There was no confusion with Prabhupada. He always had the perfect answer. He was never, someone would ask him a question, immediately had the answer. He didn't have to refer to this or that, or, thinking, or let me think about it. It was like, bang, And an instant was the same thing. Prabhupada knew exactly, don't touch my feet. And it was a great lesson to be present, to see these things. Just by being in Prabhupada's presence, you would learn so many things, the subtleties of Krishna consciousness. So it was a beautiful experience.
I remember in 1976, we were there in Mayapur with all the devotees, and Srila Prabhupada was getting ready to go to Nrsimhapol, where Lord Nrsimhadev appears in Navadvip. And there was a big kirtan going on, and Prabhupada's car was parked right at the bottom of the stairs of the Lotus building. And Lakshminath Prabhu and I were standing right beside the window where Srila Prabhupada was looking up at us right outside the car. And so we were chanting and dancing, and Prabhupada was appreciating the kirtan, and they were just about to drive away, and Hari Sari jumped out of the car and said, "We don't have Prabhupada's cane." Somebody ran up, got Prabhupada's cane, and brought it down, and then they were about to drive away again, and all of a sudden Hari Sari jumps out and, "We don't have Prabhupada's sweater." Somebody ran up, got Prabhupada's sweater, came down, they were about to drive away again, and he said, "We don't have any water." And I just pulled off my canteen and shoved it across the roof of the car, and Hari Sari took it and sat down in the car, and as they drove off, Prabhupada just looked up at me with a big smile, and it was just such an amazing thing to see that Srila Prabhupada, who's in charge of a huge movement and doing so many things, but he just showed appreciation for every little detail, and for every devotee doing anything in his service, he appreciated it so much, and I just really appreciated that appreciation. It was wonderful, and it was a bit of a sacrifice, because in those days there was no bottled water, and I was without anything to carry. I used to go down and get it from the Ganga, and now I was without water. So, but I gave it to Prabhupada, and that was it. I was happy, very happy.
Finally, found an opportunity to meet Prabhupada, because after the lecture, when Prabhupada came to his room, and there were a lot of devotees were there, and when the devotees left, I asked Brahmananda Prabhu, who was in Brahmananda Maharaj at the time, and he asked him whether I can stay for a few minutes with Prabhupada alone. And Maharaj looked at me, and he noticed that Prabhupada spoke to me before, and he was compassionate. He said, "Okay, not for long." So Brahmananda left, closed the door. I had the best time of my life with Prabhupada alone. And then Prabhupada was asking questions to me about my background and all these things. He already did it in the temple room, but also my family background, which I explained to him. And finally, Prabhupada concluded to me that, do something for this temple, because he always wanted to encourage to see the Indians take more advance to do some devotional service, because in those days there was hardly any Indians who'd come forward. So I took it as his advice as much as possible, and I'm just trying my best. I don't know, I'm not sure whether I'm doing properly, but I got an opportunity to have the design of this temple when this temple was bought, and the temple president asked me, to do something in Indian style architecture, which I did. And then I went to Vrindavan, and I discussed with some devotees down there. There was the architect for the Vrindavan temple was Surabhi. So Surabhi Swami, so he says he sat with me, and he gave me some advice what to do. Then I came back and then had the model made, is the exact replica of the model in balsa wood. And then I took it back to Vrindavan, and I went to the ashram where our temple president Sripati was staying, I gave the model to him to show it to Prabhupada for his approval. And Sripati took it. Sripati asked me, why don't you come? I said, I was too shy to go there. So I said, no, you're the temple president, you go ahead. So he took it, and then later on when Sripati came back to Montreal, I asked him, did he like it? He says, yes. He said, this is fine, you go ahead with it. So then I made the construction drawing, from which the contractor made this temple. Okay. So that was, I thought that Prabhupada has played a distinct role, and he always want to encourage and see that all the temples are done nicely, and the devotees can also benefit by coming to this temple, appreciating the architecture as well as the philosophy in Krishna consciousness.
So this story is about my wife giving water to Srila Prabhupada also. And it was 1975, and Srila Prabhupada was arriving at the Gerrard Street Temple in Toronto, and he was at the airport and was coming back, and my wife had stayed back with just a couple of devotees to help make sure everything was totally ready for Srila Prabhupada. And they suddenly heard the kirtan outside, and then they realized, oh, the water on the Vyasan had not been changed. And my wife, Purnamasi, had been changing that water every day for Prabhupada. That was their service, and making sure the goblet and everything were totally polished. And so she grabbed it and ran out and got the water and quickly wiped everything and made sure it was really shiny. And she was coming back towards the temple room. And the temple room, it was in a house, and the temple room was narrow on one side, and there was just a hallway on the other side with the door. And so she was approaching to go into the temple room, and then Prabhupada opened the door. Somebody opened the door, and Prabhupada walked in. And immediately she saw Prabhupada, and she was like, what do I do? She was holding the water tray. And so she got right down and offered obeisances, holding the water above her head. And then Prabhupada turned and walked in, and she stood up, and by then there was a whole train of devotees just pouring into the temple room, and she was there standing with the water, and she wasn't able to get it into the temple room. So finally, when everybody had finally got in, there was nowhere in the temple room to manage to get to the Vyasasan. So she tapped on somebody's shoulder, and they took the water and they passed it on up to Srila Prabhupada. And so Prabhupada started giving his arrival speech. And as he was speaking, he suddenly said, water. And so they poured some water for him. And Srila Prabhupada took the water, and he was, as he often did, he just poured it into his mouth. And as he did it, he looked directly at my wife, and in appreciation of the service that she did every day and the service that she had just done. So she felt really, again, just appreciative of that little detail, because Prabhupada definitely looked at her and was, smiling as he was drinking that water, and just appreciating her, little service, but it meant so much to him, and it meant so much to her. So thank you. It was a wonderful experience just to hear that story from my wife, and to, again, get that essence of Srila Prabhupada, just appreciating every single detail.
One of the big problems in those days was visas for Americans. At that time, we virtually had no Indian devotees. Some were beginning to join, and 99% of our devotees were American. And they were all having visa problems. Constantly, they had to go out of the country and come back. So this was a great source of anxiety to Prabhupada. And he personally met and deputed me to meet people to try and get the Indian government to give us some concession. So I went and saw the Home Minister, the Foreign Minister of India at that time, who was Mr. Vajpayee. And I went to Vajpayee with a plea that some concession be given to ISKCON devotees. And when I came back, to Vrindavan that evening and gave Prabhupada a report of the meeting, Prabhupada said, one day this man will become more important. He'll hold a very important position. And a few years later, he became the Prime Minister of India.
Well, I was about to translate the Upanishad in French, and we had some meeting with Bhagavan, Yogeshwar, and Vishwambar, and I think Janardari was there at that time too, because, you know, we found that there was some discrepancies in the English, that it was not flowing, that there was some choice of words which were not quite appropriate. The sentences were not always linked properly. So since translation always involves some kind of rewriting in some way or another, Bhagavan decided to ask Prabhupada if we could edit the contents of the Upanishad to make it more relevant, to make it more to the point, to you know, give him more credit for that book, because the content was very rich. And Prabhupada said, yes, you have my blessing. You just edited the way you think is best in French, and you have my approval. And that's what we did. You know, we edited the English, and then I translated from that edited version that was discussed between all the senior devotees. And then the French version was also reviewed by all the senior devotees, and everything was satisfied with the result. And a similar thing happened with the first canto of the Bhagavatam, because some passages, you know, when we translate, we try to go to as many sources as possible. And I noticed that in Prabhupada's Indian edition of Bhagavatam, there was many discrepancies with the printed English edition from LA. And then I noticed that some sentences were missing, some paragraphs were missing, and some things were said differently. So we prepared a whole dossier, you know, then we couldn't present it to Prabhupada at that time. He said, just go to Rameshwar and explain him what the situation is. So I went to LA with Avyaya, the Prabhu at that time, and Rameshwar said, we can't do anything about that. We have to leave the English as it is. But he said, you do what you have to do in French. So some people have noticed over the years that sometimes the French does not reflect the English, but that's because the French has been made, the translation has been done, taking into account also the Indian edition, which was the original Bhagavatam written by Prabhupada himself.
Prabhupada was very concerned that we don't give away free books. We had a program in the Home Minister of India's house. Prabhupada personally came and gave the lecture. And after the lecture, I gave the Home Minister secretary many books, more than I should have. So some devotee told Prabhupada that I gave about 10, 12 books free. And next day Prabhupada was very, very upset. He said, you shouldn't give away these books like that. We should be very careful. In other words, Prabhupada didn't want us to freely give out books. I mean, he wanted these books to be respected. Sometimes when you give free, people don't value it so much. So I learned my lesson at that time. And I've been telling devotees, we should be very cautious how we give these free books.
I was still new to the movement, 4 months in the movement. By this time, our president, Mahatma Das in Vancouver, he went traveling and he never returned because we also didn't have a suitable temple. We got overrun by, so anyway, we had to move, and we went to Victoria, BC, from Vancouver to Victoria, and there was Baudak, who later, a few months later, became our new president. Anyway, so we were at Baudak's place, and we were going out on Harinam. This was like the week before Christmas. And one day, I always enjoyed distributing back to Godheads. That was my thing with the Harinam party, you know. And I was very good at it, and also it was the most satisfying service, and I continued selling back to guys for years. So that day I was spacing out because it was like the Christmas Eve, and my family back in Ottawa were very disturbed that I had joined, and I knew that they were going to be rarely, disturbed. He's not here at Christmas. He's left us. He's abandoned us. So all my thoughts were going in like in a whirlpool. I was, oh my God, what's happening? Why am I not focused? I'm here. I have to do my duty, and I have to. So I just shook my head literally, and I said, Prabhupada, send me someone to preach to. There was a guy walking by, and he was like gone. He was 30 feet down the sidewalk, and as soon as I had that thought, that guy stopped, turned around, and practically ran to me. He walked real fast right in front of me. He says, hey, what's this all about anyway, And I was just calling out to Prabhupada, an instant response. And I said, oh, thank you, Prabhupada. Wow. So Prabhupada is the external super soul, identical with super soul. Whatever Prabhupada wants, Krishna does. It's amazing. And I've experienced that many, many times while doing books and other services. You can be so close to Prabhupada if you really put your heart and soul into it. You can be right there with him. In fact, that was Prabhupada's power, or he always said that I've never been separated from my spiritual master. Of course, I don't pretend to have anything like that Guru Nishta, but it's there, it's available. You can actually, and it's not just for us Prabhupada disciples, it's available to everyone who gives their hearts to Prabhupada's mission. Prabhupada can be right there with them every day of their lives. I had a little bit of that realization throughout my life. So Prabhupada is the sustainer, the maintainer of his devotees, and the goal. We will all join with Prabhupada in our eternal service to Lord Chaitanya. That's very nice. Hare Krishna.
I had the pleasure to attend the Sunday program in Detroit, Michigan, when that rented building was there on Jefferson Avenue. And it was a Sunday afternoon. I worked really hard as a brahmachari. I attended the program. I was just a few feet away from Prabhupada's Vyasa-san, where he was speaking. I was able to capture a real nice profile of him, based on where I was seated. And I was really exhausted physically, and I was nodding out, I have to say. I was just, how could I go through this? What a sinful, inattentive wretch you are, Bhakti Marg. And I remember waking up at certain points and said, oh, how can I doze off in front of such a luminary? And we're coming to the tail end of the Sunday feast, lecture, Prabhupada's class. And the only thing that I can remember that he said, because I did have sometimes struggled with his accent, it was like this. He held up his finger like this. And if I can get the angle for you, he said, do not be proud. So that's what stuck in my head. And that's all I had to hear. That was all. It was like a half-hour discourse. That's all I needed to hear. That's it. Finished and good enough.
One day at 1 o'clock in the night, Prabhupada called for me. Prabhupada would often call for his secretaries and GBCs, even in the middle of the night. Because Prabhupada would be busy serving Krishna 24 hours. It's not that he went to sleep. He would get up at 10:30 in the night and start his translation work. So Prabhupada had written an ad. The ad was said in brief, open invitation from ISKCON to all of India. And the invitation was, Prabhupada said, India is a poor country. I will feed everyone. So he wrote an ad on the paper with his own handwriting. Open invitation, come and live with us, like us. And Prabhupada said, go tomorrow to all the newspapers, tell them to put this in the papers, and put billboards that ISKCON is inviting everyone to come and live with us like us. So I asked Prabhupada, we don't have the means to do that. Where are we going to feed everyone and accommodate everyone? And Prabhupada said, come and live with us, like us. Like us means they have to follow our principles, chant Hare Krishna. And if they're ready to do that, then I will maintain all of them. Not that they could do their nonsense and we will maintain. So Prabhupada was very intelligent. He said, open invitation, come and live with us, like us.
Then regarding editing, the last thing is in Vrindavan when I was asked to be Prabhupada's secretary. Dhananjaya and Brahmananda came to me and said, Shrutakirti has to go, can you become Prabhupada's secretary? And I said, I've got a wife and 2 kids in New Mayapur, I'm in charge of the translation, we should ask Prabhupada. And so we did. We asked Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said, I don't need any servant. Your service is 1,000 times more important than anyone serving me personally. So you go back to France and you translate. You keep translating my books, and then when you're finished translating my books, you write your own books about Krishna consciousness. And that was it. I would have loved to be Prabhupada's secretary, but at the same time, I felt so unqualified to be with Prabhupada all the time, you know, and so Prabhupada gave the answer, and that was it, and I was happy with it.
We were getting ready for the Kumbh Mela, and I think it was 77 or 76. It was a big Kumbh Mela. And we were thinking of publishing cheap books for mass distribution. So I think we published a small book. But many people were suggesting we print the Bhagavad-Gita like Gita Press has without any purports. And they said, we'll sell lakhs. So I thought it was a good idea. And being the BVD manager, I went to Prabhupada and said, everyone is saying, we can print the Gita like Gita Press, without purports, and we'll distribute lakhs. Prabhupada said, no, you can't print any book without purports. And he said, this is not acceptable. So the point is, Prabhupada's purports make us understand the books better. And without Prabhupada's purports, we are free to make our own interpretation. And Prabhupada was very keen that people understand this knowledge as it is. So I've told this to BBD managers all over the world.
It was Prabhupada's second visit to Toronto. He was very thrilled and happy about the fact that we acquired that large limestone building, which was a former church, and on a major thoroughfare coming into the city of Toronto. It was a milestone for us, for the movement in North America in particular. Large temple room, it had all the features that you could ever ask for, and in a real nice neighborhood. So Prabhupada was very happy about us achieving that, of course with his prayers and his blessings. So everyone was very excited about his second visit now. We were out of a, sort of downtrodden, rented house, and now we've got this almost like a palace, what was like a palace to us. And us being all youthful and, let's say, thinking from the point of view of, what young men require young women, it came to the point where we had this quarters where what was the rectory before, and now Prabhupada would be occupying the place with a washroom, and then there's a bedroom, there's even like a meeting room in the middle, and then there's also like a servant's quarters with like a little kitchenette and everything like that. So now everyone was thinking, well, Prabhupada's Vedic and he's from India. And in India, the toilets, they don't have seats like Western seats. So we'll make it as Vedic as possible. We'll take off the toilet seat and then he'll feel right at home. Okay, so Prabhupada comes in, he's looking around at, his facility, and then he's shown the washroom, or what you call a restroom. And he looks at the toilet and the seat is missing. And he talks to the administrator, temple president. He says, "How can I go?" So simply like that. So maybe from an old person's point of view, you need extra facility, extra help. But from our point of view, we're just thinking that, oh, this is what Prabhupada would like best. Let's do it like they do in India, So there are a few things that we had to learn from those little, let's say, mistakes that were made, misjudgments, miscalculations.
So before the Prabhupada's departure in Bombay, I was discussing with Prabhupada how are we going to manage the Bombay temple. And Prabhupada said, make a council and have decisions made in the council. And Prabhupada said there's a Bengali saying that if you make a decision in a group and something goes wrong, you can always say, I didn't make it alone. Everybody was a party to the decision. And if you do it on your own and something goes wrong, you take the blame. So Prabhupada wanted a small council to be involved in decision making.
Srila Prabhupada was giving morning classes in Toronto, and there was quite a surge of interest from traveling devotees in different parts of North America. And there was a very nice turnout for those classes in the morning. I can't exactly remember which class it came from, which portion of the Bhagavatam, but it's a very simple thing. There was one of our brahmacharis was doing a little bit of stretching exercises during the course of Prabhupada's talk. He was just like turning his body, twisting his body like this, I guess. Just things were getting a little stiff for him. So he did a little bit of this, he did a little bit of that. And then Prabhupada picked on it right away. Everyone else was sitting like still, and this person was, standing out like a sore thumb. And then Prabhupada made a remark right in the middle, a comment right in the middle of the class, said, "Don't do this." So from that I gleaned that Prabhupada wanted attentiveness. He wanted attention from all of us and to not let anything slip by. I talked to the devotee after who was the guilty party. He didn't feel very good on the one hand, but maybe there was a little ambivalence. He felt, I got the sauce from Prabhupada, I got some chastisement. That makes me feel pretty good. I got singled out, And that's oftentimes the case, what happened for people. If someone was, let's say, just noticed a little bit, a little noticed by Prabhupada, and you felt really good.
Prabhupada was very particular about cleanliness. So one day he was sitting in the front room and he just asked me, how is everything? And I said, okay. And then he looked up at the nest, looked up at the ceiling, and then he saw there was a nest in that small room with a bird or two inside. He said, you say everything's okay? This is okay? Look at this dirt. Prabhupada had very, very sharp eyes. As some of you may know, Prabhupada would be translating books in the night. So one day he got up and he saw that the watchman wasn't there. The watchman at the front gate, at the gate in front of the guest house, wasn't there. So Prabhupada was very concerned. So he thought of a good plan. he told the watchman, every hour equal to the time, you have to ring the bell. And Prabhupada's logic was, if the watchman has to ring the bell every hour, he won't go to sleep. So that was the background that led to the introduction of the watchman ringing the bell every hour. Prabhupada was an expert manager. He knew how to solve all problems.
So Srila Prabhupada was sitting in the sitting room area, a second story to our new building on Avenue Road in Toronto. And there were some university professors there, a Dr. Shiva Raman, who was from McMaster University, and a few others. And amongst them was Professor Joseph T. O'Connell, who had been a great supporter of ISKCON during our troubling times of the anti-cult days, you can say, deprogramming times, you know. He was a great man. And he asked the question to Srila Prabhupada about, are there any female gurus in our tradition? And Srila Prabhupada's answer was very simply, yes, there are some. Well, there are some few, but there are some. And then the example was cited of Nityananda's wife, Janavi Devi, and that was pretty much about it. So just the fact that Prabhupada accepted that this is a reality in our tradition, that perhaps this is something that we should take up seriously. And Krishna consciousness movement might be a little bit of a controversial topic, but since the Master gave the okay, the green light at that instance, and other let's say, indications by Prabhupada's letters would point in that direction, that it's fine to have those who are qualified, regardless of gender, could take up this particular role and responsibility for the sake of expanding the Krishna consciousness movement. So it happened right there in the facility. And I have the good fortune of staying in that room where he said that classic, gave that classic answer.
To attract donations, we have to give the donor some tax benefit. And we were having trouble in maintaining our tax-exempt status. So many professional lawyers and chartered accountants suggested, why don't you set up a research institute? And if you set up a research institute, the government will give you 100% tax exemption. So we came up with a plan that we'll have a research institute called Vedic Research Institute. So I went to Prabhupada and said, this plan could attract a lot of donations, and if we can establish a Vedic Research Institute. And Prabhupada said, why Vedic Research Institute? Vyasadeva has done all the research. We don't need to do any further research. And there's no need of Vedic Research Institute. So Prabhupada was not interested that it will attract more donations. Prabhupada wanted to preserve the purity, and he was concerned that under the banner of Vedic research, we may speculate, whereas he has given us the real philosophy in his purports to the books that he published.
Although naturally we were, sad to receive the news, but in hearing the circumstances in which Srila Prabhupada left, being at the last, in the last few days, continuing to translate from the Srimad Bhagavatam, and being surrounded by so many devotees, to me, I felt happy. It was like a further confirmation to me of Srila Prabhupada's position as a pure devotee. is that he lived and he taught and he preached in the most ideal, most exemplary manner, and he left this world in the same way, in the most exemplary manner. So to me, that was like, was and remains a source of inspiration. That here is that person, even before leaving India, going to America, he was exemplary in so many ways, isn't it? As a householder, he began preaching. He began his, Back to Godhead magazine in 1944, etc. And then he, did this extraordinary feat of bringing Krishna consciousness in the West. And in other words, he carried it through right till the last moment. So that should be, for all of us, whether we are direct disciples or not of Srila Prabhupada, a source of inspiration in that Srila Prabhupada, he taught to the last moment how to live and how to die.
Prabhupada was in his room doing his japa when some guests came in and they started knocking at the door saying they want to see Prabhupada. The secretary said Prabhupada is taking rest. But Prabhupada overheard some people want to see him, and they were disappointed that they couldn't see him. So Prabhupada was so concerned that he told his secretary, let them come in, open the door. And Prabhupada sat for 2-3 hours and preached to the guests. So but this just shows how Prabhupada was always concerned about preaching. And even when he wasn't physically well, he did not stop his preaching. And as we know, in Vrindavan, even in his last few months on the planet, when he wasn't physically well, he did not stop his translation work. He would go on with his translation. He had Padumna read the Sanskrit. He had somebody helping him sit down. He was virtually whispering the purports. But he did that because he wanted to save humanity. He wanted to leave behind scriptures that could save humanity. So we should also cultivate a similar mood.
What I like about Prabhupada is that his total dedication to his spiritual masters, and also his conviction about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's prediction that Krishna's name will be spread all over the world. And that is the thing that struck me most, and because of his conviction, we are all getting a little bit of influenced by him.
The quality that impressed me the most at Prabhupada was really down to earth. And when I first became a devotee, the first thing I heard Prabhupada saying in the lecture was that don't make friends with a fool. Better to make an intelligent person your enemy than make friends with fools. And it was so clear. I mean, Prabhupada wasn't floating in a cloud. He was giving something very practical, and even up to today, that's one of the things that stays with me. That initial thing that I heard from Prabhupada, and hearing that, I thought, this is a very practical person. He's someone who's going to guide me, not just on the, abstract space of spirituality, but he's down to earth, the day-to-day affair. He's going to be able to deliver on all platforms. And that was a great thing of Srila Prabhupada. One of his, that I, of all, of course, Prabhupada had so many qualities, but this is something that from day one that marked me, you could say.
I think I just go back to the point that while he was a scholar, while he was able to deliver so much wisdom and quote shlokas from so many different sources, he was still very human. And I think that's really important because we sometimes get so enwrapped in rules and regulations that everything becomes rather bland and cold even. So that sort of warm side of him, which we read about from some of the biographers, helps us to, it sheds new light on us. And from what I could also see, yes, here's a person who's above us all in many aspects, but also very much with his feet on the ground. And I think that's important for devotees to catch up on, that we can't have our heads in the sky too much, in the clouds, so to speak, but to be very, real with people and very caring and get down to simple terms and try not to be too lofty or too philosophical. There's times to just, how are you doing? How's your family? How's your health? Be concerned about the person. I think that's personalism. So of all the qualities that come to my mind about Prabhupada's persona is his being very personal.
What I observed is Prabhupada was kind with everybody. I could see he's a true friend. For it doesn't matter what is the background of a person. Prabhupada wanted to share this knowledge and help people to realize their true nature. That is where what we call as Satchit Ananda of the true nature of the soul, that will actually be fulfilled when this person, anyone follows this path.
One thing that always struck me about Prabhupada is that everyone was taken in by Prabhupada. Whether it be some dirty hippie, whether it be some doctor, some professor, some priest, all the kinds of devotees we have in ISKCON, some of them come from all walks of life, and everyone, you look at the pictures today, we got thousands and thousands of them, and everyone, the way they look at Prabhupada, the way they listen to Prabhupada, everybody was just taken in by Prabhupada. He could just mesmerize anyone, not because he was a magician or anything like that, but his spiritual energy was such that nobody could resist his energy. And it was not simply charisma. It was the fact that he could pierce through your soul. He could get right to you and show you who you are. Show you what you could do, what you can do, what you could do, how you should do it. It's like he knew everything, about everything. That was extremely impressive. It was also very impressive to see how he could interact with any big personality, or not so big personalities, but cutting through the matter to know exactly what to tell them according to time and circumstances, where other devotees were kind of, oh, what is he going to say? How is he going to react to that? How would I respond? And Prabhupada just hit the nail every time, every single time. And some people were really taken aback by the way he reacted, because they could see that he was seeing through them, So that's something that was extremely impressive about Prabhupada. His aura, his general aura was a source of unlimited inspiration. Everyone, it was like a magnet. Everyone wanted to be close to him. Actually, when he left from the airport, from the temple, it was unbearable. It was like Krishna leaving Vrindavan. Nobody wanted to be separated from Prabhupada. Everyone wanted to be close to Prabhupada, to have personal relationship with Prabhupada, or to just sit there and look at Prabhupada, just to be with Prabhupada. That's the kind of personality he was. And, it's like we don't know who he was. where he came from, but obviously, to me, it's obvious that he had special powers. He was coming from the spiritual sky. You know, some say Shaktavesh avatar, some say, you know, he was a Gopa, he was this, he was that, but whatever. It's obvious that no other personality I've ever met or heard of or seen on film or interviews or anything like that, no one had that kind of potency. It was just unique. And at the same time, not everyone could recognize it, you know. Some people were still reluctant to his teaching, to what he was trying to explain. I'm thinking of Cardinal Danielou in Paris, who was all for meat eating, you know, and he wouldn't give up, and Prabhupada would try to explain. He was hard, he was hitting the nail very hard, and the guy just didn't budge. So there were people who kept their own beliefs and ideas, and that's natural, I guess, because not everyone wants to take to spiritual life, but he still had that. I mean, I'm sure these people kept some image of Prabhupada that he really shake their house, somehow or other, shake their beliefs, and even though they stick to it.
Well, I've always felt that Srila Prabhupada is the maintainer of his sincere devotees, and the beauty about Srila Prabhupada is that he's the living proof of everything he taught us. If you want to know how to serve and love Krishna, everything about Prabhupada teaches us that in the most glorious way. And I've always been so eager to hear more and more about the beautiful truths that Prabhupada has shared. But his very life is a demonstration of those truths. That's the beauty of it. So I've always been inspired to have any information about Prabhupada's life, and all the biographies and personal accounts are so valuable because they really strengthen our inspiration and our dedication. So I'm very grateful.
So amongst the 26 qualities of a devotee, of course, Srila Prabhupada has all of them, but one of them is how a devotee is a mitra, or a friend to all. So I really felt like, who could have a better pal than Srila Prabhupada, personally looking out for me? You know, because a real friend is there with you through thick and thin. They're loyal. They're even when you're down and out and you're in your worst condition, they don't kick you to keep you down further. They try to see what they can do to lift you up. So I felt Srila Prabhupada's friendship, and how a devotee is merciful, magnanimous, thinking about others, not just self-absorbed in thinking of themselves. And that taught me a lesson that if I can get into that mindset of always being concerned of others, as Srila Prabhupada was with me, then my own little challenges in life become reduced to nil, because there's people out there that are struggling a lot more than I am. And that's the antidote for my own self-absorption, isn't trying to think of others, as Prabhupada always did.
As far as I can see, Prabhupada was a Vaikuntha man. Once Prabhupada was asked to speak about his spiritual master, and Prabhupada said, "What can I speak?" He was a Vaikuntha man. So Prabhupada was also a Vaikuntha man. In my opinion, he possessed all the 26 qualities. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had predicted that the holy name will be chanted in every town and village of the world. And I have no doubt that Prabhupada appeared to fulfill this realization, this prediction of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So Prabhupada was an empowered preacher, and one great Acharya, one great Vaishnava said he was a Shaktavesh avatar, but he was an empowered preacher who was sent by Lord Chaitanya to take the holy name to every corner of the globe. And today we see that Prabhupada's glories are increasing even faster. You can go to any corner of the globe, people have heard of Prabhupada. In fact, many people come to the temple and say, when is Swamiji going to speak? In fact, many people write and say, where's the author of these books? And Prabhupada's fame is all over the world. And as we preach and spread the movement, his fame will increase more and more. We have to understand that everything we need to know is there in Prabhupada's books. Have faith in the books. Have faith in Prabhupada's instructions. Follow the GBC body. And we will be able to cross over insurmountable problems. But we need to be determined to follow Prabhupada's path. Not that we say, yes, I'm a Prabhupada Nuga, and do my own thing. Prabhupada Nuga means following Prabhupada 100%. Jai Anilo Premadana Karuna Prachu